Morning and welcome to the first session of the last day of the Spring Seminar 2021. João Pereira de Matos is going to be our first speaker, and he is a member of the University Institute of Communication of the Nova University, and his currently research focuses on an analysis of Flash in the contemporary. His paper, entitled Acheron in Cyberspace, will attempt, through the idea of a cybernetic clinamen, to characterize the spectrality of cyberspace. Pedro, welcome to the virtual computer world. I'll let you speak.
Okay, so good morning for all those present via virtual means and presential means. So I would like to start, everyone is hearing me, right? Yeah. Okay, and the presentation is on your screens, right? Okay, just to be sure. So I would like to start by extrapolating some lines of thought from the fortunate dialogue published in Chicago's University Press website between two seminal works about cyberspace. How We Became Posthuman by Catherine Hales and Holding On to Reality by Albert Borgman. So in Borgman's terms, from natural information, we saw the world embrace and transform for all its things, now ours, into cultural information. Today, synthesizing the traces of the prehistoric with the premonitory and catastrophic nature of the modern media science, we are in the age of technological information. Surrendered nature to culture, both kneel today to technology and obviously we with them. The endogenous species of cyberspace is the anonymous population. In cyberspace, the sum of unknown parts walk. It's the land of invisible emitters. In its desert, thorns and ramifications sprout with a life of their own. Post-narratives without owner, without beginning, without end, things that belong to the desert and make its exception, the mirage, its regularity. In cyberspace, we are in the unknown, between the real and the non-real, in their indistinction. Is there even a login and a log off? In the log off, what we return to? Human-animal space, the organic, we don't know. So in the desert of technology, mimics reign over previous information. Cliches without their own time, stuck to the past as if an umbilical cord prevented them from truly entering this new world. However, with each login, the body surrenders to the song of this new information. We are twisting the reproduction of the past. We are creating, but we're still far away, a de facto future and not a nostalgic future. Our entity floats, immersed in the mirages, deviating as if each primal body that moves in us were falling with a slight inclination. The substratum of our corporality is not unscathed from wear and tear. Our pre-desert material base fades to the rhythm of the world in which we live. Gaia's substrate, that which sustains our materiality, is atrophying. And who is there to tell us that on the day that our substrate has completely transferred to the other side, this one, as infinite as the other, does not expel us in the same way? And can a wave of wind from that desert reach Gaia? Can we dissociate one thing from the other? Perhaps this is our greatest mirage today. So for the idea of the cybernetic clinamen, I want you to think bits as atoms, for example. From here, everything else is made up. The great explorers of our day are there in cyberspace. In this world with its own regions, continents, denaturalized currents, viruses, nerve connections, conductions, semiconductions, its secrets, its neo-organic and quantum powers. Bits as emotions. Our leisure, our curiosity, our crying, our happiness, we are notified of this by cyberspace, mainly. In it, many emitters, but it is he, the unknown emitter, the invisible, who paradoxically reminds us the materiality of all that. Everything that has a strength has a body. There is, perhaps, in our biology still unknown, a black or intensely clear space in our own body through which these cyber bodies, these cyber traces, invisible but working, are already wandering, which works as smells and sounds for our desires and needs, Look at the kids today, for example. There is something there that constantly calls them to the interface. From the desert comes a silent and disconcerting scream. The technically mirror comes from everywhere. It's a mermaid that makes a rock of every moment. Human technology, as we all know, has always been focused, especially technoscience, on making these invisible bodies visible, on making the unseen that shapes sensation concrete. However, this post-human technology may be different. It may aim for the ultimate transparency, total invisibility. We may never see their bodies in ourselves. On the one hand, we can say that cyberspace's image is as distant today as our conscience. We surrender the human infinite to technology, and in return, this will give us an aftergod, an unreachable end, an image never composed, something other than an image, something else that we will try to imitate. Well, but if we admit this idea of a cybernetic clinamen, we admit the concrete of that world. We admit that in this, as in the world that preceded ours, there are properties, inseparable things without total destruction. The cyber world has arrived, we do not know very well when, to the point of presenting elements that, on the other hand, if separated, keep their substance unscathed. Today, for example, the most real time comes, although derives from material conditions, from quarks oscillators, from this world. The fiction of time, this accident that exists only in the things that pass through it, has become the technology of time. So cyberspace dictates the movements of markets, goods, consumption, work, desires, and shortages. At the same time, cyberspace, in its cultural mimesis, surpassed culture itself, which now applies to its global strength, an inescapable mirror to what is left of that thing, and it contains movement in itself. Well, and if there is movement, there is emptiness, porosities, thin objects, limits and separations, coexistences, contradictions, and so on. But I want to stress that cyberspace is maybe the first thing in history that is born as an accident and becomes a world in itself that starts to contain not only accidents, but simultaneously properties. In it, eternal, unappealable things wander, and bodies in wear also wander. There are cemeteries in cyberspace, and rejoice, there are also termites that feed on corpses. In cyberspace, we can say that nothing is born out of nothing and nothing returns to nothing. Total destruction does not overlap with renewal. Things always persist in things that come out of the most alive of things, and falling in deviation, they nest, clash, and reformulate themselves in others. Coming from cyberspace, being the atoms of our relationship, arrive material effluvia, simulacra, images. But what makes this effluvia different from their predecessors? They share a vital principle with us. They make themselves 3D. They reproduce, they put things to work, they turn on the water, they shape our orgasms, and so on. So I want to bring you an example. I want you to think in the ancient poet's Ennius fable, where Acheron, one of the 5 rivers that surrounded hell, becomes the synecdoche for this subterranean world from beyond to the ancients. Today, I want to give you Acheron as a synecdoche of cyberspace. So let us start with a quote from Lucretius on the nature of things, where Acheron is described as a place where neither our souls nor our bodies go, but rather a kind of strangely pale simulacra. If we remember Ennius' poem, we will remember the image of Homer, coming from Acheron, who would have appeared to him in brute anguish to reveal the nature of things to him. Homer's melancholy is well known to us. It's an angst to be just an image, to be more image than flesh. All of us who walk on the banks of the river and bathe in the waters of the digital society can identify with this. Homer, one of the prophets of cultural information, is paradoxically one of the first milestones of the sensation of technological information. Homer continues to speak to Ennius. What he lacks is a body, and we know that body is life. Homer's virtual melancholy comes as a spear against our presence. Its pending soul makes us see the cemetery that is the online, where more and more profiles and domains are more dead than alive. So where virtual things that have lost their remnant of substrate in this world, things that have become disconnected from their umbilical cord and have not survived the malnutrition of this desert. What seems to hurt in Homer's sudden and unexpected attack is the following question. Can we today, we that are in a way becoming virtual beings, remove this melancholy? All video games, for example, seem to prepare us to reincarnation. Dying and coming back to life is no longer a strange thing to us. What will happen when we pass this logic from the interfaces to our biological system? So if we had to choose a human seed, something to plant and give our errors, what would it be? Perhaps you would say curiosity. Now, what first thing did we launch into cyberspace, if not our own curiosity? That which today itself, through the precognitive, deviates from our own production. In this sense, our seed has been totally misused in proportion to our misuse of natural seeds, for example, in genetic transformation. The appeal of cyberspace, like Narcissus' mirror of water, made us want to fall into this world, dissolving its immateriality in its promise to eradicate disease and suffering. We can here signal the second great fall of man. First, we fell from heaven to earth, then we fell from the land to this place. If in the first case we lost our divine essence, in the second case we lost our humanity. What are we then? In the first case, we made the world. In the second case, we are being made by another world. Invisible cybernetic bodies write the words of this theater of real. They are our unknown emitters. We say things today like, I have a full memory, or reality is not my best window. So like a virus, these control and speech systems go through processes of aggregation, dispersion, intrusion, fusion, and producing increasingly techno-cognitive environments in which our new emitters are more comfortable to deal with our still resistant immune systems, in tension between the distinction of virtual life and the real world. So our invisible guests present in each one of us, they aim to make us docile to a degree that no despots imagined. We will be conductors, electric passages, bodies mobilized. So, well, but I don't want to subscribe this apocalyptic version of things, obviously. So the tendencies I refer to are opposed to today's tendencies to resurrect lost realities, not as just a nostalgic step in a kind of historical stasis, but as the first revolutionary movement to potentiate resistances in languages, times, places, and fictions that collide against the large technological archive. This movement distinguishes our action, allows us, quasi-subjects or quasi-objects, in Michel Serres' terms, to distinguish what there is to distinguish. On the other hand, possibly, this epistemic turn of computational media will simply intensify something that started a long time ago. Perhaps we are only naturalizing new things, such as information, denaturalizing them. The pre-Socratic atomists, for example, denaturalized the primal bodies of the world by naturalizing them, that is, discovering the minimum elements of matter and with it, the true nature of things. Perhaps we are close to going beyond atoms with this game of quantum and conscious matter. And perhaps all matter is again naturalized through a process of denaturalization. So to finish and to conclude, well, if there is anything to come out of this text, it's a recognized mixture within our own bodies between invisible and visible biological and technical things. As I said, this will not point us to total Tifidism. So take the example of Empedocles. For Lucretius, who still went against some of his reflections, the poet's writing was almost sacred. His discovery is unique and with the grandeur of making us doubt his humanity. What seems to define humanity in this case, its highest points, its genius and beauty, is precisely what resembles the inhuman. So from antiquity and the divine, we have moved from Sade to Bataille and many others of our times to the definition of a humanity through limits and grotesque experiences, which are also inhuman. United opposites, we come to the conclusion that what will always define the human is what it's hard to believe that stems from a human origin. And what better example than contemporary technology? Does anyone believe that we were the ones to produce this? So the inhuman of this technology is planetary. So the first time the human is also planetary. The technology, Gaia, and the human unite for the first time. The more inhuman the technology, the more human the thing that made it is. So there is always mixture and emptiness in bodies, visible or invisible. There are bodies only if there is movement, and the movement needs a kind of an idea of emptiness. We have in us the bodies of technology, its appeals, its germs of movement, but there are also bacteria in us. So our immune systems are only at the beginning of a new great journey of unthinkable materials and kind of immaterials. What will give birth to this new planetary technology? Imagine algorithms like seeds. Instead of immersion, let us think of a shared reality from which new things and new beginnings of things can spring up. New voids, movements, mixtures, materials, invisibles, viruses, immunities, environments, and even new rivers. So in a way, to conclude, Acheron left the limits of the world and at once flooded Gaia. Its bed will rest on the earth, and from that substract, unimaginable things can be born and will be born. So that's I want to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro, as well. Sorry. I'm anxious to put your questions in the end, but we're going to pass to Anna Dinger. Anna Dinger is a PhD candidate in the Cultural Study Lisbon Consortium. She is a fellow in the FCT, and she's undertaking an academic investigation focused on the unfolding of performance-based works, namely on metonymic processes involved in that continuation. Her paper today is entitled Duchamp Aphorism Revisited, a ghost plus a host equals to a ghost. Duchamp equation of the ghost with a contraction of hosting and guesting, entangling dimensions of hospitality and parasitism. She borrows from Michel Serres. Please, Anna, the world is yours.
Thank you so much, Joana.
Então, o que eu hei de fazer? João, primeiro partilhamos o PowerPoint para o Zoom. Depois de partilhar o PowerPoint para o Zoom, partilhamos só a aplicação? É só a aplicação, professor. Mas desktop 2 já. Desktop 2, exatamente. Foi o que nós fizemos. Sim. É isso. E agora arrastar para ali? Não, agora é só fazer isto. Exatamente. Pronto. É isso. Ok. Setinhas para mudar.
It's over there? Okay. That will be tricky.
Queres isto?
Talvez.
Faz mal, isso não é importante. Não deixa. Não estou a conseguir, tem mesmo que ser aqui também.
Aqui.
Devia ser agora, deve estar. Exato.
So, good morning, all. First of all, and a slight parenthesis or preamble, of course, to thank the organization, the committee, to accept my submission and give me this opportunity to share my work with you. And actually, most of all, to create such a friendly, hospitable environment as it has been in these past days. And I want to let you know that what I'm sharing today is both what I'm working on now, like starting to write in my PhD thesis, but at the same time is also something, you know, that it's with me for a long time. I've been entertaining some of these ideas, thoughts, feelings for quite a long time. I welcome feedback from you. I will pose a few questions that I'm posing myself during the presentation. I look forward to your comments. And I want to echo two things that I kept with me from João's presentation, which are things persist in things and viral. Sorry, João. Viral principle that was done. So let's start. Here we go. 1953, Paris. William Copley's exhibition at Gallery Nina Dossé. So Duchamp's aphorism circulated with ephemera, so that he produced for this occasion. So candies were wrapped in this aluminium paper that you see in the PowerPoint, and they contained this sentence and were distributed at the entrance. Fast forward to 2009, 2010. So in the first years of Fernando Eugênio and João Fiadeiro's collaboration, when devising modus operandi end, a new exercise, a variation of the end game, emerges. So after Duchamp, this game was baptized Ghost, as Ghost. Again, 2015, I'm in Berlin working on my thesis under the supervision of Professor Gabriele Brandstetter. We decide the focus of the investigation will be solely on modus operandi end. I had been working on the notions of metonymy and spectrality in relation to performance-based arts for some time. This idea of the spectre as metonymic continuation. And so Professor Brandstetter asked, you know, what will be your angle to speak about the spectre? And actually the answer found me soon. So when one uses modus operandi end, one question one makes before a given situation is, what does this situation have? What does it have to offer, and what do I have to offer in return? And the situation was, modus operandi end was my case study. My case study object, methodology, a bit of a complicated situation. But already there, in the middle, was a proposition of how to tackle ghostly matters. It was the ghost exercise. And ghost, as in Duchamp's aphorism, as a contraction of guest and host. So guest and host, two modulations that coexist in a body in constant negotiation. So, I will try to give you, wrong way around, a notion of what modus operandi entails. So, as it goes, Fernando Eugênio and João Fiadeiro borrowed Duchamp's aphorism, gave it a kind of another life or another breath, and I further borrowed it from modus operandi end, extending it in turn, this other life and another breath. So I like to think that in a way, Duchamp is hunting us, accompanying us, and the game continues. So it's a nice ghost to keep around, Duchamp. And how appropriate it feels that a language game or a word play finds its way to be at the heart of a game being named and conceptualized. So what about ends? What is it about, and how did it cross, its path? So to answer the question of what end is, is very tricky, and to pinpoint this feels like a betrayal. So the name in this case is not arbitrary. So modus operandi and is called and in contrast with other modi operandi, is and or. So it's rhizomatic and it's multiple. And you might recall Deleuze and Parnay's dialogue where, and I quote, say, the conjunction and is neither a union nor a juxtaposition, but the birth of a stammering, the outline of a broken line which always sets off at right angles a sort of active and creative line of flight. And. And also, Fernanda sometimes says something that I find quite interesting and productive, which is names are shortcuts. So, and this shortcut and crossroad, it names the research center and lab, it names the work itself, modus operandi and it names one of the main exercises, the end game. And I will try to give you a visual, sorry. So just to begin, before I show you some images of the end game, this is just a very brief timeline, so at blue you have the period where Fernando Eugênio and João Fiadeiro work together. In yellow, it's the whole time that Fernando Eugênio obviously has been unfolding this work. And in red, you have my time accompanying the work. And in the full red, it's actually what I locate as my field work, which is quite a bit more than just a field work, as I will tell you about it. So I knew João Fiadeiro's work from before. Actually, the first workshop of real-time composition I attended was back in 2003. But since 2012, I followed modus operandi and regularly. And between 2015 and 2019, I worked closely with Fernanda. And so my position transitioned from fieldwork and participant observation to a deeper and more intricate collaboration, building an increasingly auto-ethnographic perspective. So this ethnographic endeavor, to use Dwight Conquer-Good's words, moved towards the intimate involvement and engagement of co-activity or co-performance, end quote. So it became more and more a work of care. And to convoke also Raymond Williams, as I did in the abstract, alignment and commitment. I also call it assistance, a concept that actually belongs to modus operandi's and cloud of vocabulary, but assisting, which is quite synonymous of what Andrea Lepecki recently also recognized in attending, or used in the verb attending, is an articulation of operations as witnessing, accompanying, supporting, and taking care of. So saying that I was Fernanda's assistant is quite narrow. It's really a very different approach to assisting. So in this sense, entails visiting and revisiting, so this repetition through time, duration, and witnessing its manifestations, even becoming part of its transformation, becoming a follower. So I became a witness, an intervenient of that path in its major and minute shifts, both from the perspective of the work's biography as from my own intimate change and participation. And I committed to the task of its continuation in many ways, one being, as Irit Rogov puts it, giving account. With the accumulation of time and lived experience, I became a co-performer rather than participant observer, and a body archive rather than an archivist body. And here I'm also referring to Lepecki's idea body archive. And to use Rebecca Schneider's formulation, I became part of the network of body-to-body transmission of affect and enactment that constitutes the privileged mode of continuation of modus operandi end. So, in a way, I became proof of my own thesis. I became a ghost. And so this is just in this conjunction kind of way, letting you know how many different ways we have of trying to grasp, of trying to tackle what modus operandi and I give special highlight. I give a highlight to the way of operating that coexist with the other predominant modes of operating, which are is and or an ethical, aesthetical, political approach to life, a work through and with care, which is you can consider it in a broad sense, or you can consider it in a more strict sense, because there's actually work done with psychology, especially with a group in Brazil. So for the end game, this is not for you to read. This is just a text that Fernanda and João wrote, and that actually tried to synthesize a bit the ethics of the game. But I'll just point out to the red section, which gives you more or less the procedure of the game, which has like 3 positions to be made sequential. So the first position inaugurates the game, and the second position relates to the first position, and the third position relates to the previous ones. So it's a game of dosing, repetition, and difference. And this was my own try at playing the end game with PowerPoint, which, if you can see, so I gave numbers to the moves. So I play this game with myself, which is not always the case. You can play by yourself, you can play in pairs, you can play in a bigger collective. So my first position was that spot, and then I repeated the operation, adding a second, and then I tried to maintain as much relations from the previous positions to the next one, to the next move. So as you can see, there's a sequence till you get to a saturation point. When you get to a saturation point, it's like a first position. It's like the game starts again. And here you have the image of a game being played by participants in a workshop. So the rules emerge from the game. There are no previous rules in the sense that you have these premises of how these positions work, but each game unfolds in its own way depending on what the players are proposing and how they are relating to the moves that each previous players made. So believe me when I say that at each move, the game can get a completely different direction. And as you can see, there's the square, which is our zone of attention. But that is obviously not also so strict that you cannot open up as it happened in this game. But it exists in the laboratory setting, in the workshops, because actually this game can be played not only in the studio, but in life. But of course, it's very hard to distribute your attention. That's why the zone of attention is delimited. So there's a variation of this end game, which is Ghost, and it's played in pairs, as you can see. And there's one person that becomes the host. You can see here many different first positions. And one person is the host and stays with the square for the whole time of the game, and the other person moves. You see the directions set on the floor, and visits different games. So they become guests of all those games. And players do experience both modulations. And so here is Naya, actually, she's the guest, so you can see it in different games or worlds. And here she's in the position of host, staying with the same game. So, I arrived at two axes or directions or propositions, which have, actually it was only when I was doing the PowerPoint that I kind of understood that the third one was kind of in the intersection of the first two. So, and people as archive, and people as community, and people as ghosts. So, what I call "and people" are a modus operandi and users. So, a moving constellation of body archives that, by conjunction, constitute a body of bodies, a body archive of body archives, a living archive constituted in and by multiplicity, a multidirectional, sentient, corporeal archive, and here I'm quoting Lepecki again, that functions as a system or zone where the work doesn't rest or stagnate, but is formed and transformed endlessly like ghostly matters. And here, obviously, Lepecki is also referring to Avery Gordon's book. So, the body archive is a reenactor, what in a sense means, following Lepecki, drawing on Walter Benjamin, it is a translator. It is a restless vessel, an ungovernable, disobedient transmitter. The body archive, and here I borrowed from José's abstract, José Bertolo's abstract, elusive and precarious materiality, but a completely different elusive and precarious materiality that I think that was meant by José. So again, in the better words of Lepecki, in its constitutive precariousness, perceptual blind spots, linguistic indeterminations, muscular tremors, memory lapses, bleedings, rage, and passions, the body as archive replaces and diverts notions of archive away from a documental deposit or a bureaucratic agency dedicated to the mismanagement of the past. So he also speaks of this endless mobility that constitutes a particularly transformative and performative archive without archive, and here is using Derrida's expression. So modus operandi and further complicates the dynamics between life and afterlife. On one hand, how to circumscribe its life while it's living. On the other, what to call its manifold proliferations, the multi-implication of body archives. It also complicates the dynamics between bone and flesh, because how do we parse the duration of the life from the duration of inanimate remains? So modus operandi starts, recurs, and persists through encounters, for even the document is given to remain for the future of its life encounter again in time. With all its written iterations and lived and live instantiations, modus operandi and is something inhabited that in turn inhabits one's corporeality. It lives in, it lives on. So, yes, this was really, sorry. Here we go. So, as you can see, I have very different references for basing this argument, but I'll just quickly go through the second proposition, which is "and people as community." So there's many different ways of thinking about "and people as community," and you have the recurrent collaborators, and you have the frequent visitors that return to the workshops. So this is also one of the places where I needed work to need feedback to see how to find a way of speaking about community, but respecting all these different ways of engaging. And I'll just sorry, I'm really. And just to finish with, this is the vocabulary, so just the landscape of the vocabulary end, so you can have a grasp of it. So guest and host are modulations that they are qualities, and you can deal with the quantities of it. And I'll just finish by saying that, back to the start of actually the presentation and expanding on the twice borrowed Duchamp's aphorism, the ghost is here considered as a metonymic extension, continuation, another possible way of becoming, beyond the opposition of life and afterlife. And people start as guests, like inaugural visitors, become hosts, recipients, continue to be guests, revisitors, continue to be hosts, carriers, and keepers. So parasites, ghosts know by heart, which is a labor of love, ingest, digest, and exgest, remembering, reassembling, and recollecting modus operandi end. And modus operandi end becomes, as Steiner would have it, fiber of their fiber, heart of their heart. And so ghosting, or the operation of these ghosts, is a constant negotiation between modulations and dosing those modulations. Ghosts are both guests and hosts successively, not with success or completion, but again and again, incorporating and excorporating the vocabulary and the way of operating, thinking, feeling, doing. They are hosts by harboring, receiving, becoming anchorage, and carriers, becoming particles of circulation. So by frequentation, returning, revisiting, reappearing, they also remain guests, rearticulating the relationship over and over again. So recurrence and repetition with difference build up a durable consistency, a metastable community. The condition of the ghost is of becoming, the gerund in between, form of an ever-changing, potentially never-ending process, ghosting. Sorry for the extra time.
Thank you, Anna, and don't worry, in the end of the session, I'm sure there will be questions where you can open up. And I could not stop thinking the relationship between your work and João presentation, not only on the idea of guest and host, common terms in the internet or cybernetic space, but also on ideas of games. So thank you so much. Next speaker is Tiago Costa, who is here with us. He has a degree in cultural curating and production and a post-graduation, I think, in specialization in theater studies. He's currently developing his PhD research on performing arts and moving images. Tiago Costa, the name of the paper. Tiago Costa paper is entitled Spectral Bodies, Tânia Carvalho, Spectral Bodies and Choreographic Drills. A paper that aims to show how the memory of movement prevails in the work of the choreographer Tânia Carvalho, applying the theory of a theater of living images drawn from the work of Ottomar Anschutz, the photographer. Sorry, thank you, Tiago. I'm a bit nervous.
It's not our language anyway. Good morning. Thank you for having accepted my paper. It's quite a privilege to talk amongst so many other diverse approaches on material and immaterial, and particularly having the opportunity to talk about an art form that is made to disappear as dance is, and as our previous Anna's presentation really showed. Now, for the little details, so I just press here? Okay, para baixo, certo. So my paper is on the work of Tânia Carvalho, the choreographer, the Portuguese choreographer Tânia Carvalho, and is it like this? No. Damn. Well. Okay, so image 1. A Bag and a Stone, dance piece for screen, signed in 2018 by the choreographer Tânia Carvalho, opens with a diffuse image in an open shot where only the music narrows a proximity with bodies that will take a while to be distinguished. Then, to the right of the screen, the body of a dancer appears, vertical but with her face leaning towards the spectator, holding in the palm of her hand stretched out in what suggests being an apple already in the process of decomposition. The body stands out through an affirmative and challenging tension, in stark contrast to the shapeless mass of other bodies, which, in a movement that simulates a jump cut, regain the frame, approaching the female body and therefore the viewer's attention. Since this is a film and not the live capture of a choreography, this approximation of the dancers' bodies simulates the mediated proximity between the screen and the spectator, activating the presence of the latter and contributing so that his perception simulates the presence in a live performance, moreover, eluded by the presence on stage of an orchestra that interprets the score. In Tânia Carvalho's body of work, this relationship with the spectator, made of dribbling its perception in an exercise of permanent reflections and visual antagonisms, is inscribed in the search for an ideal spectator, one capable of producing and adding senses to the images normally presented on stage. And what then is real and what is mere echoing or mirroring of past images? The theater of living photographs, that is the dance theater of Tânia Carvalho, operates on a principle of expressive hybridization, where the assumed theatricality distorts an idea of organicity and fluidity associated to the movement, suggesting, without affirming, a set of narrative hypotheses that will recompose or undo themselves from choreographic schemes that never presuppose a linearity or narrative sequence, despite being based on a highly deterministic and rigorous scheme of composition. Presupposing the presence of the viewer as a way that provides meaning to the development of actions in space and time that to become real, the edited approach relies on a desire for the spectator to observe and interpret. Not only how that object is identified, described, and positioned by the one watching it, but also considering that what is being seen depends on how it will be described in order to become real. The predetermined strategy developed by Tânia Carvalho exists so that to ask from us how can choreography be defined not by anticipation or a logical premeditation, but rather by the development of associations of ideas and relations between images and memory, or between presence and description, thus accompanying the choreographer's goal for not to proposing a self-sufficient or unique interpretation. For Tânia Carvalho, an image is a representation of an idea, despite being the result of a predetermined intention. Therefore, does not lose its autonomy and is characterized through the sharpening of its independence towards what is being presented on stage. By proposing that one asks how one describes what one sees, she positions herself and her relation with movement and image, with memory and perception, in concordance with Guy Debord's statement in La Société du Spectacle. The alienation of the spectator for the benefit of the contemplated object, which is the result of his own unconscious activity, is expressed thus: the more he contemplates, the less he lives. The more he accepts to recognize himself in the dominant images of necessity, the less he understands his own existence and his own desire. In her case, that is even more true precisely since she does not believe in a dogmatic interpretation of what's being staged, as it does not seem to interest her either that the presence of the dancers need to compose an image, but become ways to establish a proximity with the spectator. Therefore, a certain staged intention, when later captured by a camera, or fixed by a drawing, does not necessarily has to be translated into meaning, since the hierarchy of the relations that we establish for what we see are related with where we place ourselves as spectators. So, much more important than what we are seeing are the arguments found to build hierarchies to then describe what we see. As Jacques Rancière puts it, the hidden secret is no more than the obvious functioning of the machine. In the case of Tânia Carvalho's choreographic discourse, this secret is a commitment to the idea of future sharing and building complicity for what Rancière identifies as consensus. Consensus means the agreement between sense and meaning, that is, between a mode of sensitive presentation and a regime of interpretation of the respective data. It means that whatever our divergences of ideas and aspirations, we perceive the same things and give them the same signification. Precisely because there is no hierarchy of meanings, it is important how we relate what we see and, in the profusion of images, build a choreography that complements and amplifies what we watch on stage or on a screen. Deep down, always preparing a response that allows, from the discursive point of view, to accompany the hierarchy that the memory establishes from what the gaze registers, since even when there is no linearity, there is sequencing, and even when there is no narrative, there is hierarchical description. The work of Tânia Carvalho, while relying on images, proposes an approach that goes beyond the strong visual impact that fades onto the performance ends, adding to a reflection on how we become an active agent, in order to quote John Berger's ways of seeing, in a certain sense, acting upon something made to become immaterial discourse. Our role is to provide the autonomy that images require to be real. Or, as John Berger puts it, seeing precedes words. The film A Bag and a Stone is organized in sequences that are very similar to another performance by the choreographer 27 Bones. No, we'll display how... Hmm? Okay. With the bodies occupying the stage through distance and intersecting positions, where the lines they draw create escaping opportunities not only for the performer itself, but also for the spectator, shifting both their attention to another element that might come to replace it. Organized in different scales, closer or furthering away from the frame, playing around with both the frame and the stage depth, fictionalizes the very mechanisms of the editing process. A stage becomes a frame that becomes a perspective, thus becoming an image that evolves into a memory. Repeating cyclically, the coincidences gain another layer of reading, where it is less the detail that matters and more the grandeur of the gestures, or the way the dancers amplify the asphyxia provoked by the falsified framing. Because what matters is not the way in which the image can fix the same perception, but to create different perceptions from the same positioning, these perceptions can grow and expand through a close relationship between the screen and the spectator. They are fake edited images, hence fake edited perceptions. Tânia Carvalho brings us inside the stage, making us believe in a failed threshold of audience performance, thus creating a sense of belonging, while in fact what it makes is to attract us to a vertiginous realm of sharp angles, scaled movements, and bidimensional bodies. The vertigo is real, and it is on us to blame. We made ourselves believe that we had trespassed the mirror. In Homo Spectator, Marie-José Monzin states that the image will never be a matter of truth, bringing certainties that would put an end to belief or doubt. The image is doubtful, it is suspicious, and never leaves the unstable, uncertain, and moving ground of that which links the subjects of the word to each other in the temporality of tenuous or betrayed promises. It is, by definition, undecided, and from its uncertainty awaits our decision. In other words, an image creates doubts, and because it creates them, it is an image impregnated with senses and meanings. Not doing so would mean not to represent nothing. In simpler terms, it would not move. It would not be a moving image. The image is what it is because it is an hypothesis of representation. The image in Tânia Carvalho's work, whether on stage, film, or in a drawing, exists because we give them meaning that does not have to correspond to the primary objective or intentional meaning of whoever created it. It relates more to the way we want to read that image and if we believe in that reading. This will determine the role we want to attribute to those images within a discourse of a particular artist. The artistic singularity of that discourse and our own identity as viewers. Whether an image is dead or alive, as Georges Didier Huberman puts it, producing a discourse and building memory, it is the most important task we have as a spectator. In that sense, looking at the drawings that are part of the series Toledo, that since 2014 she has been drawing, is a very intimate approach on how movement becomes a choreography and an image entices meaning. We always speak of manipulated images, and in the case of Tânia Carvalho, if we speak of specters, we speak of shadows. If we speak of mirrors, we speak of projections, where the light work is not unrelated in what it leaves and allows us to intuit. As Hans Belting writes, the image is like a shadow, and it is thus different from a body. It is distinct from the body, just as shadows is distinct from the body, and at the same time resembles the body, as also happens with a shadow. A fleeting and changeable apparition, the shadow is certification, index and negation of the body, whose substance and limits it dissolves. Without marks or erasures, and in a very intuitive way, a kind of amplification of the choreographies she has been making over the years. These drawings are described like this. What we see is the pure pleasure of error-making, equivocation, surprise, and foolishness. It is the matter of denunciation and exposure of paradoxes, vices, and unimputable attitudes. Is the sadism that these drawings show in everything crueler than the expressive gestures seen or staged, softened by the gentle certainty of the stroke? There is a hidden and deepened pleasure in making all actions inconsequential, as if, despite being fixed, all images should remain immaterial. These drawings were not meant to be seen as notation, nor as a sketching scheme for better depicting and interpret Tânia Carvalho's choreographies, even though they can be used to look deeper into some details of her movement, namely in what regards the relation between drawing and moving image. It helps to the reading of her movement to see it as a reconfiguration of the idea of ephemerality associated with the performing arts, its non-imputability. It remains to be seen whether images are unimputable and are not responsible for the consequences they produce, namely in perception. Seeing not only precedes words, but forms images. Who's to be responsible then for our own reading of a work if that work is meant to disappear? In this ambitious but so freeing physical act of drawing, in this innocent experimentation of the consequences of the marks left by the ballast of a memory, we can see once again, and just like in A Bag and a Stone, the way Tânia Carvalho relies and trusts not only on the spectator and their capacity of perception, but in the crimps and angles of an image, detailing to its fissures and flaws what we believe to be real. The correlation between the drawn movement and the choreographic one is one where the choreography becomes rarefied rather than transformed, in a gesture of suspension of its own ephemeral condition, thus constituting itself as a fertile ground to reinvent itself, no longer as a disciple of linear narrative, but as the architect of a new memory, certainly charitable, surviving beyond the references, capable of constructing and autonomizing its own indistinct vocabulary. The image does emerge as a common space for meanings and memory, with evident narrative and dramaturgical opportunities introduced by a movement that no longer intends merely to express or underline, but to observe the consequences of its intervention. By the fact that it is being interpreted by someone outside the frame, the paper, or the stage, the movement expands or contracts those elements that are invisible but being sensed, like the moments when the dancers observe themselves and in that reflection see themselves and us. What we see in Tânia Carvalho is deeply and profusely exposed through the dancer's exhaustion and the overload of the movements. It is true that a movement becomes increasingly porous and unravels in front of us, blurring the boundaries between body and space, and not allowing us to understand where our interpretation of it begins and ends. The very discursive construction of the choreographer assumes the autonomy of images as a constitutive element of its discourse, by making them livable, then becoming part of us, hence human and mortal, accessible and addressable. We can then determine choreography through this process of remembrance, when the image that is kept from us is not the image of a movement, but the image of our perception reflected and materialized in the mirror as ourselves mirrored on stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Very beautiful presentation. Our next speaker is Maithri. Maithri. I'm not sure if I'm spelling your name right, sorry. She's currently pursuing a research master in cultural analysis at the University of Amsterdam. Originally from India, she has a background in media studies, English literature and political science, and holds a diploma in information art and information design practices. her paper entitled Unsex Me Here, Lady Macbeth, Gender and Ghosts of Future Pasts. She will explore the scene of the canonical tragedy to rethink ontology and critical theory in spectral studies through the lens of gender, sexuality, and object-oriented ontologies. Welcome, Maithri.
Hi, can you guys hear me and see me? Yes, yes. Can you see the presentation? I hope everybody is able to see the presentation. I'm joining you from really far.
Okay.
Yep, okay, great. Yeah. Okay, hi, good morning to everyone. My name is Maithri, I'm from the University of Amsterdam, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak here. This is my first seminar ever, so I'm really excited. And I'm joining you guys from really far away in India. So in case my voice breaks or my video gets cut off, please, or if you want me to explain something that I've already mentioned, please don't hesitate to stop me and ask. My paper is titled Unsex Me Here, Lady Macbeth, Gender and Ghosts of Future Past. And it's basically a look at a part of a monologue from Shakespeare's canonical tragedy, Macbeth. And it is this monologue right here. Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here and fill me from the crown to the toe, top full of direst cruelty. Act 1, Scene 5, lines 40 to 43. Over the years, the role of Lady Macbeth has been played by many, from those possessing the male body to those pregnant with a new life inside. And as a consequence, many a person has delivered this very monologue multiple times over. The irony of these cases is not lost on me. In fact, it comes through poignantly in the simple deliverance of this monologue, because gender, then, as Judith Butler argued, literally becomes performative. Lady Macbeth's short monologue is unapologetically blunt in not only recognizing but calling out the specters that constrain the mortal reality of being gendered. Pulling these lines out from the bigger narrative of the play and partly from the larger monologue itself helps me situate them in the context of the present. I believe this allows me to make a connection through the act of extracting these lines from its narrative and historical context. A connection to the present, I'm sorry. My argument for this paper starts with the assertion that in their meaning, these lines become a way of cultural materialism, a pathway to understanding the haunting relevance of this monologue today, thereby remaining contextually relevant to contemporary gender and spectrology studies. The politics of gender. In her provocative work, Females, Andrea Long Chu makes an acute distinction between ontology and gender. To be female is ontological, a state of being experienced by everyone, regardless of their gender, sex, or sexuality. Gender, within this framework, becomes a social norm, a way of coping with this assertion that everyone is fundamentally and ontologically female. So, what does it mean to be unsexed in the first place? While essentially a question of ontology, it is important to emphasize Jordi Rosenberg's argument about current ontological discourses. They have made a home in the interstice between what is considered properly political and that which is disregarded as radical fanaticism. I quote, "The ontological turn, in other words, equips itself with the fanatical character of radicalism, but only as a kind of technical sheen. What I am saying is that central to ontological thought is a flourishing of the limit to that thought, a limit that becomes internal to and constitutive of that thought. That limit is politics." The ontological turn becomes literal and metaphorical in Lady Macbeth's defiant declaration to be unsexed, the right to ask of which is a defining characteristic of the ontology that is female. The mere act of asking to be unsexed becomes the interstice of the ontological turn, where a realization occurs of the need to reclaim one's ontology. In contrast to Lady Macbeth's assumed gender as a woman, the fanaticism or engaged radicalism here becomes the implication that Lady Macbeth is highly aware of her ontological position as female, the ontology of which is situated outside the realm of normative gender politics. I feel the need to take a moment to explain why this paper doesn't require the deep scrutiny of the act of unsexing through the lenses of gender, sex, and sexuality superficially. I believe it would be redundant to reiterate the difference between these terms, simply because the point lies far beyond it. The argument is to reach a state that goes beyond an ontological turn, a turn that can only be achieved with the aid of specters and spirits, as I'll demonstrate further in the paper. To borrow a Marxist analogy, the concepts of gender, sex, and sexuality become the bone and sinew of the superstructure, the space in which lies our normative reality. What Lady Macbeth alludes to through the demand of unsexing is beyond the scope of the superstructure. She is recognizing the invisible realm beyond it, the base or the infrastructure of politics, of ontology, in which lay the spirits that can unsex her. This is the site where the ontological is reclaimed. To reduce Lady Macbeth's demand as a mere desire of becoming another gender is disregarding the disruption of the binaries that she asks for. Lady Macbeth is here, in the space of the ultimate negation of the nuances of the superstructure, the space where the spirits that tend on mortal thoughts reside, above and beyond the materialism of normative reality. Lady Macbeth's turn on and turn to the spirits, that is the limit of gender politics, forces a shift in ontological thought. Lady Macbeth is political, to be asking to be unsexed. She is performative of a social consequence. But in asking to be unsexed, she reclaims the ontological state that was always hers to begin with, veiled by the specters of spirits that haunt her. The question remains beyond our mortal material comprehension. What are these spirits that Lady Macbeth turns to and turns on in order to demand the act of unsexing? At the beginning of Spectres of Marx, Derrida writes, haunting is historical, but it is not dated. It is never docilely given a date in the chain of presence, day after day, according to the instituted order of a calendar. As mentioned earlier, ghosts or spirits do not necessarily belong to the normative reality. Lady Macbeth aptly places the spirits as tending on mortal thoughts, for their contemporaneity is incumbent on mortal presence. Mark Fisher further asserts this time out of jointness of a ghost and explains that ghosts arrive from the past and appear in the present. The play between the past and the future brings to mind Andrea Smith's argument of the two temporalities having remained joined at their root. She says that the normative futurity depends on an origin story. The spirits that Lady Macbeth calls to become the spectral origin story that lodge themselves in the interstices of the very ontological turn that could grant her demand to be unsexed. Avery Gordon, in the introduction to her book, Ghostly Matters, Haunting and the Sociological Imagination, breaks down why ghosts hate new things. She explains the hatred as a result of characteristically being attached to the events, things, and places that produce the ghost in the first place. She says, by nature, they are haunting reminders of lingering trouble. The act of becoming a ghost is rooted in the very nature that the object was originally tangible and dissatisfied with their actual mortalities. The spirits that haunt future past revel in the act of haunting by the fact of their own tangible, unfulfilled ontologies in their past time, in their own origin story, in other words. Lady Macbeth's forceful realization of her own ontology gives form to the immaterial ontologies of the spirits that haunt her. To borrow Lauren Balland's phrase, these lines then become a moment of genre flailing. We are now on the same plane of understanding object ontologies as origin narratives by virtue of the frictionless barter between beginnings and their consequent prognostication. Except, by the way of genre frailing, Lady Macbeth creates friction in what was a frictionless interstice by advocating for a haunted ontology through the unsexing. Lady Macbeth disturbs her current reality in a way that intrudes on one's confidence about how to move in it. The confidence of the spirits that haunt and regulate a normative reality is intruded, the same spirits that haunt unbeknownst to mortal thought. Gordon describes haunting as distinctive from trauma as it produces the need for something to be done. Haunting is not the response to trauma experienced by the ghost in its material past, but rather an invisible force that drives present mortals to perform what is disguised to be a normative reality. The normative reality that resides on the superstructure of the ideas of gender, sex, and sexualization, as discussed earlier. Through the reclamation of her ontology, by calling out to the spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, Lady Macbeth forces a confrontation, therefore denouncing the agency that the haunting was supposed to have on her. This moment could be described as a meta-performative encounter that renders the haunting insecure, using the assertion of her desire for negation as a moment of empowerment within its mortal form. Jordi Rosenberg, again, in his polemic paper, Molecularization of Sexuality, claims that ontology is never an unmediated field. I believe the mediation that occurs is what it means to be haunted. Lady Macbeth's desire to be unsexed is not merely rendering the haunting insecure, but it is also fueling an ontological turn that will help break free of a normative reality. The act of haunting is not only helpful, but is required in order to be able to reach the point of reclaiming one's ontology or to actually make the ontological turn. Perhaps then it would be safe to say that we are all haunted. Our existentialism is a present absence, which resides within the absent presence of this hauntology. I end this paper with the proposition of looking at haunting as this very mediation that fuels a desire towards an ontological turn. Desire then becomes a distant cousin of the spirits that tend on mortal thoughts. In demanding to be broken free by means of unsexing through the acknowledgement of unapparent histories that keep her confined to the superstructure, Lady Macbeth attempts to change the structure of gendered engagement. Driven by being haunted but aided by the spirits, she ultimately shatters the glass of what it means to be gendered, sexed, and sexualized. I wonder then, surely Lady Macbeth is ontologically female, but who's to say she's a woman to begin with? Thank you.
Thank you, Maithri. We had a little problem with your image froze in the last minute, but if anyone in the audience wants to put questions, please put your... sorry, yes, of course. Tiago, João, Ana. And podemos pô-los aqui visíveis? Okay. I'll put the first question to Maithri. Maithri, do you believe in ghosts?
Yep.
Okay. There's interesting... Sorry. There's an interesting idea of the ability of ghosts to shatter the normative glass ceilings. And to bring, I would like to also invite Tiago to participate in this conversation because of the theatrical and the charge of the tragic that you bring through. Also, actually, João, also does this kind of analogies between two moments in time so far distant that they seem to actually being ghosted by you. I'd like to ask you, Maithri, just a little thing that puzzled me in your presentation, and maybe because I could not hear so well, just to do with the idea of unsex me now, and through the lens of Mark Fisher that you also spoke, if would also not mean a disruption of the reproductory machine in which we rely our workforce, and in which way you actually bring this idea of unsex me to, general political debates. It's just to clarify me.
I think, I think I want to actually assert my point as something beyond it, and that's why I brought in the Marxist idea of the superstructure and the infrastructure, because there have been a lot of an analysis of this monologue as something was pregnant who did monologue. And yet the idea of being unsexed would definitely mean that it would require you to remove your reproductive system. But I personally think that when we're talking about this idea of being haunted, and we're talking about an ontology, that this is completely beyond the understanding of the superstructure of things, which is the ideas of what gender is, what reproduction is, or what to like to be attracted to someone. I think it's beyond that superficiality entirely, because to be ontological, at least personally, I feel like to realize your ontological self would mean that it's not merely to identify yourself, but it's to realize what you can do to realize what is driving you to do certain things and what you can do within that. It's to realize the limits and to kind of figure out how to break free of the limits. So I hope that answers your question.
Breaking distinctions, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Tiago, do you want to pose Maithri a question, or can I also post a last question also to Tiago, because exactly because of ontology?
As you intend.
I'm sorry, I was meaning to João. João, treating cyberspace and the Acheron River as analogs can help us navigate the electronic transformation that is currently underway. And as well as you said, it can also kind of make us consider and rethink the future we are leading to. But also might risk, to some way, for us to treat cyberspace as not as radical as we thought. There's some that says nowadays that if it's not online, it doesn't exist. So it means that there is a certain existence that has to do with the presence online. And there has been loads of work in archaeology of internet that had been unburying layers of past lives, of past digital networked of our digital networked minds, right? So, but I prefer the term of metaverse, the concept that is being, I'm sure you are familiar with, that has to do with worlding. And it seems to me that there is a construction of a world in which the immaterial and the virtual gets completely free of the physical and material world in your paper. That actually triggers me the question of how material is actually, you consider the material realm of cyberspace to be. I'm not sure if my question was clear, just that, where is the material?
Yeah, it was clear, Joan. Yeah, but on that point, I think I completely agree with you. And when I talked about the idea of I really think that although this kind of phrase that you mentioned, the idea of things only existing if they exist in cyberspace is quite true. What I really want to work with it's the specific materiality of all those consequences, and there's I don't know there's a kind of I think my generation can and this connects with a kind of ontology, like a kind of reliving the past in a certain melancholical way, and that's the example of emulation. Um, there are a lot of technologies that obviously were converged in the computational media, and this emulation process it's a thing that's becoming very material to us. So for example, platforms like a Game Boy or such things as teletext are now, you can emulate them in the computer, but there are technologies that went missing, or supposedly they don't have this materiality anymore. They don't have like people connecting with them in their specific terms, but it remains a certain desire for us to emulate those past experiences and give them a kind of meaning. And I think this process of emulation, it's one of the examples that we do this in our life. And yeah, there's a mimicking of the logic of the cyberspace that is not immaterial in any point. It's completely material for us. And and that's the idea beyond like being notified of everything right now. Our food is coming, we're notified of our sexual desires as well. We're notified by apps for everything. And yeah, I think it's the most material world possible. If we look, for example, sorry for the long exposure, but because concerning of my investigation, the word flesh in Greek, that's sarx, it has an etymology of cutting in Proto-Indo-European languages. And I think many scholars today define our epoch like an excarnation kind of age of era. And I think it's totally the opposite. It's the era of flesh, flesh being here something that's constantly cut. And you have this in bioengineering with all the schemes and metaphors about cutting and editing and everything. And you have this with modern technology. We are always being cut in our materiality, in our flesh, with these notifications and everything. And this logic of interruption, that's very parasitic, but I'll leave that to Anna. It's very material. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but I pointed some ways or some topics about it.
Yeah, Michelle Sheres was a presence in both of your. Anna, do you want to pose any question to João? Anyone wants?
Actually,
Okay.
Anna, I have a question for you. I don't know. You're hearing?
Yeah, go.
I was thinking about it. It really interests me, your whole presentation. I'm really keen on Duchamp as well. And I think as well is a nice ghost to keep around. And on the games, on the end games, it arises obviously the question of hospitality and its dual, its theoretical dual, which can be hostility, since they come, as we know, from the same word in Latin, hostis. And my question for you is, in those games, isn't there a parasitic shame in these games? Which I mean, is there a game without winners and losers? Isn't there like a struggle or violence or destruction aspects in these games in the process of making the archive in the community? And my second question could be, is this game, such as the episodes of Bossi and Philemon and the Gospels in Christ and everything, a game of faith? When you're acting as a guest and you're entering someone's domain, or the other way around?
Yeah, well, I wish I had written down because it was a lot. Let's see how I can, if I can tackle all that. So obviously, I mean, I'm terrible at time management, as you could witness. And I actually did, I just went ahead with the whole community part. I just spoke about a little bit about the body archive and then this other notion of ghosts that is at least less dire than the hunting and that we are used to speak about. So it's always a struggle for me because it's really difficult to give someone that has never been on a workshop or that has never listened to Fernanda. And I say Fernanda because João and Fernanda they are not working together anymore, as you could see for the blue segment. And Fernanda keeps on with this modus operandi, and João actually came back to a previous designation, which is composição em tempo real, real-time composition, although it's very informed by this collaboration of and. Also, and is very informed by this time of collaboration. But to try to tackle your questions about hospitality and parasitism, I actually didn't unfold that in the presentation. I'm obviously very aware of, and Derrida points that very well in his text, I never can, hospitality, right? Yeah. So he, but he actually speaks about absolute hospitality also, which would be an hospitality that doesn't, it's unconditioned in a way. And that's one of the things that I do think it manifests itself in Ant's community and Ant's people. Regarding the game itself, the game is it really unveils your patterns and your inclinations. When you play the game, you really find out a lot about yourselves and others. I didn't went too far in explaining, but actually the game is played in silence, right? No one explains what they are doing or anything. Of course, you can use words, but the game is usually played in silence. But it is a game played in that. With those premises, of trying that, there's a first position that inaugurates the game, that's a situation that everyone has to deal with. Then the second position, if you use these ethics of game, then and of trying to find a way of living together, because that's, if there's a name of this game, is to find out how we live together and how we can find a common plan and the joy of a common plan. So what you have is, you have a second position that relates to the first position. So it's not some thing that you do just because you want to, but if you're using this ethics, these premises of the first, second, and third position, you will relate to what is there. That's why you had 1 point and then 2 points in, you know, like in the 2 spots on the next corner of the square, and you know, you go on this doses of repetition with difference. And then the third position actually confirms the direction that is already given by, you know, the previous relations. And then you feed the game with difference and repetition. And if you really are using this ethics of sufficiency, that's you find that common plan, and there are no winners or losers, because you really the aim is to try to maintain the vitality of that plan together. Yes. So is there? I don't know if so. Actually, but this being said, of course, you feel there are people that have different tendencies, and this is obviously always a negotiation, because for 2 reasons. First, because you have people that actually don't care that much of maintaining that common plan, and so they will fragment the game. And then, but you can, that's actually an investigation, you know, research that is done through the game. And then there's another thing, is that obviously there's all these tensions and negotiations between of every player with itself and all the players, and so that kind of resistance or conflict, or it's something that it's negotiated all through. I'm sorry, it was really a long answer, and I really didn't tackle all, but I hope you come to a workshop, and yeah.
Forethought to João, is it? Please.
Hello, thank you all for your presentations. They were all very interesting. I would like just to comment on one thing that was common to Anna's talk and Maithri's also. Something that just caught my attention is the structure that both of you brought. One by the outline of the and the rules of the game, and the other as a social structure, as Max social structure. And came to my mind a statement that Paulo B. Preciado did, that he's opposed to any binary, and as there's the in and out of the structure, the being part or not part, what can be shown, what cannot be shown, in all this, in any structure. He says that he watches the fall of the patriarchal system and the modern and postmodern societies, as an engineer watches a building falling down, and there's nothing more that can be done to put it back up, and that we already around its ruins. And well, that was just a comment that came to my mind, and I would like just to state that was all your presentations are very interesting, and thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're going to have to close. Of course.
Come to Miriam, and I'll speak with you in the interval, Joana.
I don't have much to add to what this hospitality and ghosting deals with, as I would just like to point out that there is a film done by Georges Jacome called precisely using the Marcel Duchamp's equation that really questions how far can we go in this negotiation when we establish rules that are constraints, namely not only our own bodies, but physical spaces like houses or landscapes, and how do we manage our own presences within the realm that is around us. and that I would like to invite you to see that film, as it is based on choreographical approaches, but also physical approaches that are done both by the camera and the gaze of those being filmed. Yeah.
Thanks, Tiago. I was aware of but I haven't seen it yet, so thanks so much.
Então, nós já não temos mais tempo, Joana. Ela queria falar?
I think Maithri wants to... Maithri? Sorry, because your image is frozen, so we actually don't know if you want to add something.
No, I don't have anything else to add.
Okay, thank you.
Joana,
So-
thank you. Just thank you and sorry for interrupting the discussion. That was very good, but I think you can follow up in the pause, and we will be back at 11:40 for the next panel. Thank you.